Foxtrot was a soldier in the Squadron 1AF. His closest friend at the time was Clone 1AF TJ. They met the day they were created, only a few clone chambers apart. The squadron wasn't around long before it suffered losses. Foxtrot, Clone 1AF TR, didn't have much contact outside his own squadron and was left distraught after his friend was killed by the Sentinel's third incarnation during the Andromedan attack on Times Square. The day after the attack, rumors spread that Concha was conducting tests on squadron members, experimenting with their mutations. Foxtrot worried that his white hair was enough to get him scrapped, and so he approached his squadron leader, Clone 1AF AA. "So, about the mutation checkups," he said, his voice cracking, his eye contact poor. "Don't worry about it," 1AF AA assured him coolly. "Alpha, they could throw me out." Foxtrot pointed to his hair. "They aren't weeding us out. They aren't even checking all the squadrons. We're meeting up with Concha today. He's just checking a few squadrons," Alpha explained. "For what?" Foxtrot asked. "Project Ray, he calls it. No one knows what it's about." "Oh." Foxtrot didn't like the ambiguity about the checkup, but Alpha's sureness of his safety calmed him enough and he loosened up. Not much later that day, 5 squadrons met up in the hangar bay of the 1AF clone facility. The leaders of each squadron stood at the ready before their men. 1AQAA, 1AFAA, 1AGAA, 1ACAA, and 1ARAA stood at the ready to report to Concha's commands. Concha walked down the row of squadrons with a scrutinizing look. King Vistor slugged behind him, holding a clipboard. Concha walked with a staff, tapping on the ground every once in a while, causing a faint glow of a plasma stone at its tip with each tap. He stopped in front of the 1AF squadron. He squinted at the squadron and tilted the staff he held close to his ear. The stone dimmed in and out and hummed slightly. "Mark it down." Concha leaned his staff toward Vistor. Vistor stared into the stone and looked over the squadron, counting clones until he stopped at one in the middle. Foxtrot could have sworn it was him the king was pointing to. "I don't like taking orders from you, Concha. I am the king, after all," Vistor said as he wrote something down on the clipboard. "Don't look at it like taking orders," Concha urged. "You're doing your job." He stepped forward to the next squadron. Vistor scribbled something onto the clipboard and continued following after Concha, his wings passively flapping behind him as he slugged along. Concha didn't walk far before he stopped again in front of the 1AG squadron. He listened to the stone on his staff and scanned over the squadron. When he apparently found what he was looking for, he pointed the staff to Vistor, and again Vistor wrote something down. They walked past the 1AC squadron and stopped finally at 1AR, where Vistor scribbled something down again. "All right." Concha stood with his arms behind his back. "You may return to your duties." He nodded. All the squadrons dispersed and made their way back to their ships, except for 1AF. They were already where they needed to be. Foxtrot didn't think much of the king's visit until the next morning when he awoke to the news that Alpha had died. "What?" he asked the clone that told him. "How?" He, along with 1AGAA and 1ARAA, were on some sort of mission to Sanzi, and they were killed. The clone, 1AFAB, informed him. "They were by themselves? No men with them?" "No, just them 3. 1AFAB answered. "That's really weird." Foxtrot held his chin. "So you're next in line, right? You'll be taking his place as squad leader?" he asked. "No. Concha said there's a special promotion this time, something about redistricting." "When? Why?" Foxtrot sat up from his bed. "Right now." 1AFAB answered with a monotone voice. "And unknown. If you ask me, I'm not sure there's not something more going on here." 1AFAB nodded with pursed lips, unsure of himself. He turned around and made his way to the clone facility's kitchen near the hangar, leaving Foxtrot alone in a hallway to think to himself. All of Squadron 1AF returned to the hangar that morning after their breakfast, and with them the squadrons 1AR and 1AG arrived. They stood in the silence of the asteroid base, further out of the hangar and not safe from the artificial rain, and without their leaders, all of whom were now dead. Concha stood before them, alone this time, without Vistor. "Attention!" Concha yelled. All the clones stomped their feet. Concha cleared his throat and lifted his clipboard. "The following clones have been promoted to squadron leaders effective immediately. Squadron 1AF, 1AF TR, Concha announced, beginning his march to the next squadron. "What?" Foxtrot looked around at his fellow men, who all turned their heads to stare at him, their new leader. "Squadron 1AG, 1AGRO, and Squadron 1AR, 1ARLO. All leaders come see me. Now. The rest of you are dismissed." 1AGRO, 1ARLO, and he now stood in front of Concha. 1ARLO held out his hand to Foxtrot. His mutation seemed to be that his hair was blonde. His eyes were white, and his gaze was beyond Foxtrot. He was blind. "Call me Arlo." 1AFTR. Foxtrot introduced himself and shook Arlo's hand. "New leader of the 1st Alpha Foxtrot Squadron, huh?" Arlo smiled. "Nice to meet you, Foxtrot." Foxtrot smiled awkwardly. He hadn't had a nickname before. "Arlo." Arlo introduced himself to 1AGRO. Agro shook his hand, but didn't respond. He was nervous. Concha tapped his staff before the 3 of them, causing the plasma stone at his tip to glow each time. He approached Foxtrot and tapped the staff before him. The stone glowed with a medium brightness. Concha squinted at him, then moved on to Arlo. He tapped the staff in front of him, and the stone glowed with a very dim brightness, not much more than its natural glow. He tapped once more in front of Aggro, and the stone glowed the brightest. "Come with me," Concha demanded of Aggro. "Take these." Concha handed Foxtrot and Arlo new badges. "Enjoy your new positions. I'll be keeping in close contact with you." Concha walked away with Aggro, patting his shoulder, mumbling something to him as he led him to his ship. "I'm a squadron leader," Foxtrot whispered to himself in disbelief. "We're squadron leaders." Arlo nudged his arm. "Feel like we could be good friends, you and I. We won't be in close contact with each other, our squadrons aren't close alphabetically, and after what happened to the last clone I called a friend, I refuse to allow myself to get close to another. Friends are off the table." "I'll change your mind," Arlo smiled at Foxtrot. Foxtrot chuckled, looking down at his badge, but glancing up at Arlo. Arlo wore him down. Since the day they were promoted to leaders, their friendship did indeed grow. The 1AR and 1AG squadrons moved into the 1AF base, creating a joint clone facility. The 1AF facility was the largest of the asteroid bases. The three squadrons were always sent on missions together, most notably the battle for Canada Prime, the day the humans evacuated to Janistar and the Sentinel made Canada Prime virtually uninhabitable. Aggro never really grew close with either Foxtrot or Arlo because of his close affiliation with Concha, who both Foxtrot and Arlo didn't quite like. All this time, they were suspicious that they may be on the wrong side of the war, and they wanted to do something about it. Foxtrot set off one day on a special mission with his squadron, ordered by Concha. It was a suicide mission to a moon of Ilsos, Sanzi, and it was a miracle that Foxtrot had even made it out alive. The purpose of the mission, it seemed, was to either recruit the second Hive to their side, or scare them off the moon. Hive 2 left in the end, fleeing to Amalga 5 in its infancy, but Foxtrot's squadron still suffered major losses. He witnessed his men die by his own command. The battle against the second Hive of Terrors didn't end well for any of the squadrons on the mission. Concha never gave a clear reason as to why they attacked in the first place, being that those terrors seemed peaceful and unintrusive. Everything about it rubbed Foxtrot the wrong way. He barely managed to escape Sanzi by himself, zooming off in his ship for his asteroid base. As he was returning to the 1AF asteroid clone facility, he made his routine call for landing. "Requesting a landing, this is Squadron Leader 1AF, does anyone copy?" Foxtrot said over the radio. It wasn't long before he realized, as he approached the asteroid, that it was destroyed, mangled beyond recognition. In a panic, he radioed again with a different message. "Squadron 1AR, do you read me? Arlo," he called desperately. He landed quickly and looked around for any sign of what happened. The cloning facility was destroyed, malformed, melted, and scarred beyond repair, and beyond comprehension. The artificial rain splattered on the spiderwebbed mess of bent and melted light fixture beams. The artificial gravity systems were busted. Hallways were exposed to the air and the metal was burning. The base was empty of clone life, and Foxtrot was alone. "Is anyone there?" he yelled. He turned his head to be greeted with a massive metal beast standing in his way. A score lion, brandishing its scorpion tail and flaunting its teeth, stood in a pounce-ready stance before him. Its three eyes glowed a bright green. Foxtrot stepped away, his hand hovering over the pistol by his side. "Hey." He held out his other hand cautiously. "Hey, do you know what happened here? Where are your masters?" The score lion's jaw opened, its eyes narrowed, and a speaker blared.
"Survivor spotted."
"Am I the only one?" Foxtrot asked. The score lion's eyes shifted to a deep glowing red, and its speakers blared again.
"Mission incomplete."
It widened its stance. "Damn it!" Foxtrot pulled out a pistol and shot at the score lion's face. The score lion's head exploded, and as its metal carcass fell to the ground, two more score lions rounded the corner behind it. Foxtrot turned and ran down an exposed hallway. He skidded before a sliding door with broken sensors. It wouldn't open. He fired at the controls with his pistol over and over to no avail. The score lions cornered him in the hallway. He looked up and saw a hole in the ceiling. He jumped and held onto the ends of the burning metal with his arms and elbows, wincing in pain. His legs dangled beneath him as the score lion swiped at his feet and jabbed at his legs. A score lion pounced up at him, and he used its face to push himself up to the top of the hallway. Standing on top of the clone facility now, Foxtrot looked around to assess the situation. With a better view of the innards of the clone facility, his suspicions were confirmed. The valley crater of the asteroid that the buildings were nested into was destroyed, obliterated and charred, burning and melting, sparking with exposed wires and smelling of burned flesh. He could see the burnt, twisted, and ghastly bodies of his fellow clonesmen, muscle burned into the bones of the men that scattered the floor. Score lions wandered the base, searching for life, it seemed, out of malice and not for rescue. As Foxtrot turned around to see out into the empty space behind him, he was met with 5 score lions, backing him onto the edge of the cloning facility. If he were to fall now, he would be flung out of the artificial gravity and into the cold expanse of space, left to die as all the other clones had before him. He turned around and saw out into space all the clones that would rather have jumped than faced the flames, as corpses floated around the asteroid, sparkling the sky just outside the gravity dome. In this moment, everything that Foxtrot had known was gone. There was no reason to stay alive, no one to keep him company, and no safe place to hide. As he closed his eyes, he pushed up with his feet and threw himself from the hallway's roof and out of the gravity bubble into empty space. He closed his eyes tighter, trying to wipe his brain of what he'd seen, instead trying to think only thoughts that brought him happiness, to die on a high note. Memories of fighting by Arlo's side came to mind. Arlo came to mind. Air escaped him. He knew he'd only have a few more seconds of pain before he was relieved of the life he had never asked for. He opened his eyes as he felt cold metal hit his back. He turned around to see a clone ship there to rescue him. The hatch was open with a clone wearing a strange helmet gesturing for him. Foxtrot held out his arm and allowed the clone to pull him into the ship. The hatch closed, and Foxtrot breathed in air as quickly as he could, hyperventilating. Hey, calm down, it's fine, you're safe. The clone tried to comfort him. He pulled off the rectangular helmet from his head and shook his blonde hair out of his face. Arlo? Foxtrot coughed, barely breathing. You're alive? Did you see what they did? I'm blind, Foxy. Arlo helped him up. But yeah, I saw it. He gestured toward the strange rectangular helmet. The suppressor helmets help with that, strangely. Seems I'm not the only one with the mutation, and it seems these helmets are made for more than keeping rogues in check. What happened? Foxtrot asked him. To the facility. All the facilities are like this, not just 1AF. Millions of us, the clones have just been wiped out. Every single one. I thought I was the last. Who would do that? The Sentinel? Foxtrot asked. Even he wouldn't pull something like that. Arlo shook his head in disagreement. Rogar? Foxtrot asked. I'm not too sure. I was just headed to ask Conchna about it, see if he survived. Arlo looked away nervously before turning back to Foxtrot. Hey, maybe after the fact we could run off to Parv like we said, hide from all this mess. Yeah, Foxtrot smiled. That would be nice. Sometimes I feel no amount of running would be enough. What more could we ask for than a planet all to ourselves? Arlo asked. A universe away from this mess? Foxtrot shook his head. Arlo looked away, thinking. After Foxtrot felt well enough to stand, Arlo flew the ship off toward Ilsos and to King Vistor's palace to approach Conchna about the situation at hand. Agro sat by Conchna in Vistor's palace in a room behind the throne room. He was polishing Conchna's scythe with a nervous and somewhat fearful, regretful look on his face. A rectangular suppressor helmet sat by him, waiting. He and Conchna heard the palace doors slam open, and Vistor yelled, "We've got a code white! And gray!" Conchna stood up angrily and snatched the scythe from Agro. He mumbled under his breath as he stormed out of the room. "Conchna!" Arlo called out as he stormed into the palace, marching down the aisle. Foxtrot tried his best to keep up with him, nervously shuffling by his side. Conchna stopped by the steps leading to Vistor's throne. He seemed surprised to see both Foxtrot and Arlo still alive. He looked away, somewhat fearfully it seemed, then back at Arlo. "Why are you here?" Conchna didn't seem like he had time for conversation. "Conchna, the entire clone army is gone, just wiped out in an instant. Do you know anything about that?" Arlo asked worriedly. "Has anyone told you? Where's Agro?" "I fear we might be the only survivors," Foxtrot pointed out. "What happened?" Conchna narrowed his eyes and thought to himself, trying to figure out what he would do next. He glanced at his scythe and turned around to look to the room where Agro was waiting. "I'll be right back. Stay here." Conchna pointed. "That's an order." He stormed off to the room where Agro was. "Arlo, I don't know if this is such a good idea. Conchna didn't seem so happy to see us alive, and he didn't react at all to what we told him. What if he's behind it?" Foxtrot suggested. "Shh." Arlo didn't want to think about what Foxtrot said, instead trying to stay optimistic. "Don't be crazy." Foxtrot narrowed his eyes suspiciously as Conchna came out of the room and approached them almost angrily. "Arlo, I think we need to get out of here." Foxtrot held onto Arlo's arm nervously. "No, it'll be fine," Arlo insisted. Conchna stood before the two of them and looked Foxtrot directly in the eyes. He raised his scythe in the air and said, "This'll have to do." He sliced the scythe through the air. Foxtrot ducked down. The blade narrowly missed him, instead cleanly slicing through Arlo's neck, beheading him on the spot. Foxtrot turned to watch as his friend's head fell to the ground. "Arlo!" He screamed in agony. Arlo's body fell to its knees before slamming onto the floor into a puddle of blood. Conchna twitched his head to Foxtrot in fear. He raised his scythe again. Foxtrot kicked Conchna in the chest and ran from the palace in a hurry, crying and screaming, afraid and in shock. He just witnessed another of his closest friends murdered, and by his leader, no less. This confirmed for him 100% that he was on the wrong side of the war, and so he ran for his life, not looking back, never intending to. The next day, Foxtrot found himself in a run-down old bar on the bad side of the worst side of the sector. He hid his face in a hood, trying his best to stay far away from wanted posters of him that were quickly put up around the whole of Ilsos. A small, red, insect-like alien sat by Foxtrot at the bar. He was short, his eyes barely peeking over the counter edge. His intricate purple antlers distracted Foxtrot. "Do you mind?" Foxtrot asked. "You've got a high bounty on you," he remarked of him. Foxtrot hid his face more. "Name's Ganto." The alien held out his hand and shook Foxtrot's rather forcefully. "I'd kill you, but I have my eyes on a higher prize right now. Just saying, you shouldn't be hanging around these parts." Ganto wiped his mouth with another of his arms, still shaking Foxtrot's hand. "Why?" Foxtrot asked, pulling his hand away. "This is a bounty hunter's bar." Ganto smiled slyly. "Do you know how I can get out of here?" Foxtrot asked. "The door's over there," Ganto pointed. "The planet, I mean," Foxtrot clarified. "Do you know anyone with a ship I could borrow?" he asked. "I've got a ship, the Freyset. Not to borrow, but I can take you somewhere." Ganto admired his pointed hand at the end of one of his 6 arms. "Is it fast?" Foxtrot asked. "I need to get far away from here, out of the galaxy if I can." "Is it fast?" Ganto scoffed. You've never heard of the Fracent? You work with Vistor, right? How could you not have heard of the Fracent? I don't see why I should have. Foxtrot looked around. He didn't like being in one place for too long. How much do you want? He asked, shifting his eyes around the bar to make sure no one beside Ganto had recognized him. What was your bounty again? 500,000 Sornos? No. Foxtrot shook his head. I could buy my own ship with that kind of cash, and fly it too. I was created to be a pilot. Oh. Ganto raised his other arm, showing off his sharp-tipped hands. And I guess my other target will have to wait, now won't he? Making a quick decision in fear, Foxtrot punched the little creature in the face and ran for the back exit, knocking his stool over and pushing his way through the patrons of the bar. I was joking, damn it! Ganto held his face. I was gonna negotiate! The bar led to a massive ship garage. A little Andromedan standard service robot wheeled around the garage for maintenance. Service bot! Foxtrot yelled as he ran to the door.
HRM-13 at your service.
The bot bowed. Little Ilse in red, where's his ship? Foxtrot asked.
Voidin 12, Model B, the Fracent.
The bot pointed ahead.
I'll lead you to it.
It wheeled to the ship. Foxtrot followed it in a hurry. Oi! Imrango! Ganto yelled from the back door. What do you think you're doing? Sorry, Foxtrot yelled. He ran after the service bot that was moving too slowly. He picked it up and ran into Ganto's ship. The white ship itself was bulky and boxy at its center, but 4 sickle-shaped wings extended out past the cubish cockpit, and Foxtrot judged that it could go maybe as fast as Ganto boasted. The red detailing helped make it look agile as well. He quickly hotwired it and launched it away from the garage and into the sky. The ship sped ahead quickly, but as it burst through Ilsos' atmosphere, pushing gas up with it, it sped up to its true potential, zooming past the stars and quickly out of the Andromedan galaxy. Not too long after he entered the edge of the Milky Way, the ship was stopped by an outside source, a tractor beam from a ship of Wayan origin. The Wayan ship boarded the ship he'd stolen. Foxtrot held up his arms, ready to be arrested for being a clone. He was ready to become a prisoner of war. Put your hands up! Vax's second incarnation, the astronaut, demanded of him. I'm running away. Foxtrot closed his eyes and held his hands behind his head as he dropped to his knees. I'm defecting. He looked up at Vax with pleading eyes. I want revenge. Vax couldn't turn down helping a man who looked so similar to a man she once knew. It wasn't just that the man reminded her of a past incarnation of the Sentinel, but his hair gave her a hunch. All right, follow me. She took him onto her ship and sat him down in her co-pilot seat. The service bot that Foxtrot stole rolled up to the control panels of the Fracent and set it to autopilot. He rolled his way into Vax's ship, the Riptide, and turned off the tractor beam. The Fracent detached and sped off back to Ilsos. The service bot rolled up to Foxtrot's side. Would you happen to be Foxtrot? Vax asked. Yes, how did you... Foxtrot made his way to his seat. Time travel? Vax said nonchalantly. Speaking of, I think I know of someone who could help, regardless of your problem. Vax explained how she knew someone that might be able to help, and during her explanation, she sent a message via her box to the Sentinel. Foxtrot had started to explain to Vax the recent massacre of the clones. They're all gone. This didn't have to happen. Foxtrot ranted to Vax while she waited for the Sentinel to respond. It's over now, Vax insisted, trying to calm Foxtrot. She tapped her fingers on the console, impatiently waiting. But I can't unsee that, my whole squadron dead. They were my responsibility, and I let them down. Foxtrot looked to the window of the Riptide, looking over the stars. And then, him. Foxtrot looked away, remembering what happened to Arlo, assuming he was dead. It wasn't your fault. But his blood on my hands, you don't know what that does to a person. I could have saved him. It could have been me, Foxtrot argued, beating himself up and blaming himself for the death of his friend. It should have been me. Vax stared out of the cockpit, waiting for help to arrive in the form of the Sentinel. She hadn't seen him in ages and had assumed he had gone missing. Vax looked away. She heard an all-too-familiar mechanical flash and turned around as fast as she could. He's here. What, are you sure? Foxtrot turned around too. The 4th Sentinel came from the corridor into the cockpit room, surprised to see Foxtrot. It wasn't the incarnation of the Sentinel Vax was hoping to run into, but it would do. Foxtrot? The Sentinel questioned. You made it! Vax beamed excitedly before she ran up and hugged him. So this is the guy you were talking about? Foxtrot stared at the Sentinel curiously. This isn't what he pictured at all when imagining the Sentinel. He can help? So, do you remember Foxtrot? Vax asked. Back when I was in my first incarnation, and you in your second, we met him with the astronaut. Me, in my current... that's just confusing things. You remember him though, right? Vaguely. The 4th Sentinel squinted. Okay, well he has no idea. He's only just meeting me, for the most part. Time travel, am I right? Vax laughed. He said something about needing help? The Sentinel sat down in a nearby cargo crate. And you know the rest. The whole fiasco with Conchna and the gravity manipulator, magic healing wormhole stones, my broken ankle. Foxtrot winced as he turned the ship and waited outside the shield gate. He pressed an autopilot button and turned around. I thought they killed Arlo, but I guess they kept him around. That's what Project Ray was. Why would only you 3 just happen to survive? They had to have kept Arlo alive for a reason, Quinn pointed out. I guess he was the chosen one or something. Foxtrot stood, stumbling forward quickly after, holding his side. Vax caught him and Quinn stood up to help. The gate opened and the ship auto-landed. I heard Ray mention that. What was he talking about? The Sentinel stood up, ready to land. That army wasn't for power in numbers, or as a contingency plan in case Rogar betrayed them. That was the backup. Konchna wanted to produce a clone with the same powers as you. He thought that he maybe had a remnant of what you had, and that it could be found with more mutations and more clones. Some of the mutations turned out like mine. Foxtrot pointed out his white hair. But I guess he narrowed it down to 3. He stared at the floor, realizing the implications of Konchna's decision. Theoretically, Konchna, Agro, Ray, and I should all have varying degrees of control over plasma. The ship landed with a thud, shaking Quinn, Vax, and the Sentinel. Foxtrot tried to stand, but flinched when his hand pushed further into his wound. The door of the ship opened quickly, the hydraulics pushed out steam, and the government personnel quickly came to the extended ramp. Take him to the hospital as quickly as possible. Vax helped Foxtrot down the ramp. Inform Head of Defense that we need to step up our game on the border, especially around the gate, over the Sentinel's lab, and over our office. Yes, ma'am. One of the soldiers nearby nodded and ran for a buggy. Vax turned her attention to the Sentinel and Quinn, while Foxtrot was being carried away. Her face was cold and expressionless. We're at war again, Sentinel. Help us. Please. Vax walked past him and into the ship. Quinn looked up at the Sentinel. What are we going to do? The Sentinel hesitated for a moment before finally groaning. Well, we have to. He sighed. You shouldn't be a part of this. It's too dangerous. Didn't you say I become the president one day? Quinn reminded the Sentinel. I mean, assuming you weren't lying, that means I can't die. Not yet, anyway. I haven't been the president yet. Quinn smiled. Why do you want to stay? This isn't some sort of time travel adventure. This is war. People have died, and people will die. You want to be a part of that? I want to be a part of the reason people stop dying. Quinn smiled. Like you. Yeah, I'm not a good example to go off of, Quinn. Vax approached the Sentinel and Quinn, holding 2 Andromedan rifles. She tossed one to Quinn. Keep it. She nodded. You'll need it. Sentinel? She directed her attention to the Sentinel. There's something I need to show you.